If you haven't watched part 1 yet, check it out first to understand this video better. Part 1 is in the description. Part 3. Bloodless. If you've ever seen the History Channel's TV show Alone, you'll know that the animals our participants encounter are often some of the scariest things about the show. Sure, many starve themselves, willfully or not, hook themselves in the hand, cut their legs and whatnot. But there's nothing more dramatic than when the dark of night overcomes their camp and they hear a rustling and grumbling right outside of their shelter. But one of these moments you've never seen is the story of Timothy, who tried to fight back against his aggressor and lost. For the first time, this is his story made public. Timothy wasn't exactly our more impressive participant on the show. Many of the men tend to be burly prior military or skinny-ish survivalist hippies. Timothy was just about right in the middle, not usually someone we'd put on the show. Vegetarian, never hunted, good with tools but not particularly impressive, could start a fire with some help from his Pharaoh stick. But what he had that many candidates lacked was authenticity. He just seemed like a downright good guy, albeit insecure. So we wanted to have him on to serve up something different to our audience. In that way, he didn't disappoint. He did things differently than most participants typically do. Most participants establish a shelter first. Timothy was hungry, so he found some field with a weird-ass flower and started chowing down for a couple of hours. "Can't build on an empty stomach," he said, as if he hadn't eaten right before being dropped off at his location. He then essentially built himself a mini pool of sorts, it being pretty warm in Patagonia at that time of the year. He claimed he wanted a good place to hang out where he could be certain no fishes were going to bite his toes, where glacial fjords might not afford such confidence. It was certainly unique, if nothing else. He did eventually build a shelter, though, and it was surprisingly nice. He did a fair job at choosing the right wood, stringing it all together, using a little paracord tie everything tightly, and some foliage nicely compacted down to create an as comfortable as it can get bed. Everything seemed to be going quite well at first, but sometime around day 3, things started to get a bit weird for Timothy. He had been lying down in his shelter, just talking to the camera about whatever and whatnot, when there was a rustling just on the other side of the wall. It clearly startled him. He jumped up and did the usual ichawai toward the sound, and then silence, listening to see if it was still around. "Get out!" he yelled out, and you could hear whatever it was scramble away. This isn't uncommon. After all, we're the strangers temporarily invading some other animal's territory, so it can take a couple weeks or so for both to get used to the idea of being in a new place or having someone else take up residence. Usually it goes pretty smoothly, though we'll often see a competitor or two get too scared and drop out during this time. Wildlife in Patagonia is different, though. Sure, we had giant black bears in Vancouver Island, but there's something a little different like Patagonia's puma, otherwise known as a cougar. You might not be too familiar with cougars, but are more familiar with other terms for them: mountain lion and panther. These aren't small cats the size of a puma shoe or so. These are 7-foot-long, 200-pound predators. They're not something you want to be staring down at, especially not in the night when they can see and you can't. That's one reason Timothy was rightfully pretty skittish. To his credit, though, he didn't tap out like 2 others did. But there are times when it can be too much. They push themselves too far. Suppress the fear that keeps you alive. Timothy realized this, I assume, but maybe it was too late. The competition made him ignore the warning signs. Rustling in and of itself isn't a warning sign. That's just the animals scoping out what's going on. We've been over that. A warning sign is like that of finding a young, dead goat, drained of blood, sitting at your shelter's door, its eyes wide open in fear toward the opening. Except no sound had been made all through the prior night, and nothing was caught on the outside bringing it up and setting it there. When Timothy woke up to this sight, he was visibly shaken on camera. I would be, too. Sure, my house cats bring me gifts, but this didn't have the same tone. Anthropomorphizing aside, this seemed to send some message. It was something far closer to "get off my lawn" than "here's some food, Dad." He didn't seem to get that, though. Maybe it's hindsight that makes it obvious. But for Timothy, it was a scary situation, still pretty early in the competition. That was really nothing more than an animal leaving it there by chance. But the way the goat was killed was horrific in and of itself. Timothy seemed to get the message eventually, though. Every few days thereafter, there would be something new. A large pile of scat. The lifeless body of a bloodless baby boar. Once it was a pile of small teeth. Something weird was going on at his camp. Except Timothy, instead of tapping out like most might have, decided to get to the bottom of it. The cameras, no matter how many he put out or where he put them, never really caught anything interesting outside of a flash of a tail, something around fur or quails, on the very edge of one camera view. Instead, on the night of day 86, Timothy decided to wait up for it, machete in hand. According to footage, at around 1:40 a.m., a sudden scream came from just outside of camp, accompanied by violent rustling in the direction of some heavy brush. Timothy sprang up from where he was sitting in his shelter and grabbed his flashlight in his other hand and rushed toward the entrance, leaving his emergency satellite phone behind. On one outside camera view, you could see Timothy round the front of the shelter, ready to light up the mysterious animal. As he ran just out of view of that camera, a second outside camera picked him up, still running toward the brush, accidentally running into a thick branch from a nearby tree, knocking the flashlight from his hands, dropping to the ground and illuminating the camera's view far too bright to see anything. What we heard next on the camera can't be adequately described, nor would I want to, as I'll have to live with those desperate screams, yells, and cries for the rest of my life. From what I could tell, it was over quickly, lasting about a minute between the sounds of Timothy and those of continued violent rustling. When we arrived at his camp on day 87, we found his body on the edge of camp, completely drained of blood and his organs missing, the only superficial wounds being some superficial claw marks and 3 holes in his abdomen. After finding him dead, we quickly had another crew fly over to the only other competitor still in the running and evacuated him, and later faked his crowning after a couple of weeks back in the United States, after we knew everyone was safe. That's why, in the show, the winner was crowned the day after the last competitor was medically tapped. He wasn't really the runner-up. That was Timothy. Timothy was a good guy with a great heart, but sometimes things get to us, whether it's curiosity or ego or something else. For him, for the first time in his life, he was ready to face his fears, but he chose the wrong battle. We still don't know what exactly attacked Timothy. We assume it was a puma. Some locals claimed it was the chupacabra, a mythical creature they had warned us about that ruled the woods and would come out at night to attack livestock. We'll never know, though, as we'll never go back to Patagonia again. Part 4. Why we won't tape a kids' version ever again. After picking up all of the children for the kids' version of our TV show alone, I knew Adam was a little different than the others. As one of the producers, it was my job to validate our casting department's choice of participants, and kids are always hard to read from their Skype interviews. But when Adam showed up acting cool and calm, which was very different than his Skype interview, and from how most of the other kids acted upon meeting them at the airport, I thought that was strange. That would be just the first of many strange moments with Adam. Taping kids' versions of adult shows is somewhere between really fun and really terrifying. Alone being a show about survival where we've had contestants get hurt, starve themselves, and, as you've read before, disappear, this fell somewhere far closer, if not over, the line of really terrifying to tape. After all, we're taking responsibility for 12 kids' well-beings. To alleviate some of our concerns, and especially the concerns of overprotective parents, we put into place special safeguards. We set up more cameras, we helped set them up and did all the tape and battery exchanges ourselves. A flashlight and pot were part of the equipment we gave all the kids, and we would do 3 times per week check-ins instead of the weekly check-ins we instituted after the whole wool situation. But that isn't to say it's all bad, taping a kid's version. There are certain benefits to it. First, it's good ratings. They like kids. They do and say funny things. Even these kids, who were mostly pretty serious outdoors people already, hunting, foraging, and camping with their families. Plus, they're innocent. Except for Adam, apparently. The Adam we met in the Skype interview was clearly nervous. Brown hair, blue eyes, freckles, small, skinny, a little on the runt side, which wasn't surprising as he was the youngest of 6 kids. Not just came from a big family, but a family big in prepping, though didn't seem to be into it as much as his dad was. Sure, he had hunted, camped, been on adventure excursions, which I gather were more like militia training sessions, but he didn't really seem to be all about it. But his dad signed him up for the casting call and arranged for the Skype session, and we thought his combined innocence and knowledge of survival tactics would play well to viewers. The Adam I picked up, though, was different. Cool, calm, and collected, as the saying goes. The nervousness was gone, not exuding any sense of innocence. It was like he was prepared, he'd been here before, was confident he'd win, and I couldn't so much as get a small laugh out of him to my terrible dad jokes. He just sat there in the passenger seat looking out the window, taking note of where we were going. The kids never met each other before the competition, and part of that was because of Adam. Unlike the other kids, all of whom flew into Vancouver proper, I picked him up at the local airport on Vancouver Island. So we never got the entire cast together before taping, which for a kids show would have been nice to get that B-roll/intro footage. He actually came in on the same day that we started taping, so half the kids were already in their spots when I picked him up, and we drove right over to the docks, where we met a film crew and headed straight to where we determined he would make camp. One of the odder parts about Adam was that he brought less than half of the things he intended to bring. The kid participants, like the adults, get to bring 10 items with them, which they buy while at home, and we reimburse them for the cost. We get a list of these items before they come, so when Adam showed up with nothing more than a hatchet, that seemed odd. But he insisted that's all he needed, and he didn't even want the flashlight and pot we gave all the kids, though we left them on shore for him along with the rest of his items when we dropped him off. But the fact that he didn't bring a sleeping bag, tent, saw, fish hooks and line, or anything else you'd normally see was odd. As I said, though, we would check in on the kids 3 times per week, generally each Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, weather permitting. And, of course, each kid received a satellite phone for if they needed help or were ready to tap out. We'd do the same for Adam, of course, and debated checking in on some every couple days since he brought so few items. He proved us wrong, though. Right from the start, he created an impressive shelter, a nice, sustainable fire, and found a hardy bush with berries that would sustain him for a few days or weeks until he found other food sources. Adam thrived where we thought he'd fail. Some other kids thrived just as well as Adam did, but then strange things started happening to them. One mysteriously lost his bow and arrows, another had a tent blown away, I guess. People lose things out in the wilderness, though, especially when they accidentally drop a black ferro rod or inadvertently drop it into the fire. But then we got other strange reports from the kids. Some reported seeing another child far off in the woods, crawling around outside of camp or even looking at them, or at least in one case, when the kid came back his camp, he heard some rustling at the edge of camp and the thing ran off quickly. But by the time the kid would go and investigate, the strange child or thing would be gone. We checked each kid's tapes and didn't see anything nefarious from any participants. None of the cheating we sometimes see or wandering off too far was happening. Even if the kids' camps were closer than the adults' camps usually were, we're still talking about miles of dense forests, creeks, rivers, and mighty hills between them, so we were fairly certain it wasn't a kid. One day, though, Adam came back from a hunt wearing a coonskin cap. He didn't take that with him. He told us he found it far off in the hills. There's a lot of hunting out there, so that wasn't particularly strange. Plus, participants are told they can use anything they find. But what was strange was he came back from the same hunt with something, some type of meat we couldn't readily discern on camera. He had already butchered it and skinned it, so the most could figure was maybe it was a portion of moose thigh, a large feral hog, or something of that sort, though taking those down with nothing but a hatchet would be difficult. By the time we saw it on tape and came back to camp and asked questions, he had eaten it all and discarded the rest in the river, he told us. After that, though, we started getting reports of even stranger things happening around some kids' camps. Emily was another participant who encountered weird things. While fishing, she spotted someone on the opposite shore watching her. She called out and got nothing in return. When she looked away for a moment and then looked back, the person was gone. Later that evening, she said the person came back. A small person with brown hair ran into her camp, stole her hunting knife, and ran out. She took chase but got clotheslined by fishing wire that had been set up between two trees outside her camp. She didn't set it up. William, a kid near to Adam's camp, woke up being strangled by someone on top of him. He struggled and passed out, and when he awoke, he found his camp on fire. He got out and couldn't find his satellite phone and had to flag down a fishing boat that was passing by, who got in touch with us. We wanted to check the tapes, of course, to figure out who did it and what happened, but the fire melted everything and even caught about an acre of woods on fire. He chose to drop out of the competition even after we said we'd help him find a new camp. The strangest thing to happen, though, was when some being appeared at several camps at the same time. 3 different kids, spaced out about 8 miles from each other, reported seeing the same thing at the same time. A small person with brown hair peering in their direction from outside of camp, and immediately afterward, a fire came from that direction and spread into camp, forcing them out, at which time the small being chased after them for miles, while they could hear the zooms of arrows fly past them. It was bizarre. It was at that time we decided to go ahead and end the competition and taping. Something weird was going on and we couldn't explain it, and we were legitimately worried about some type of predator, human or otherwise, stalking the children. When we got to Adam's camp, he was gone. We waited around for him to come back while the other kids were picked up by other crew members. Very late that night, Adam finally returned and we told him we had ended the competition and would be sending everyone back home, which Adam didn't react to. We took everyone back to a hotel to rest for the night, let their parents know that we ended the taping, and arrange for tickets. After I dropped Adam off at his hotel room, I called his parents to let them know he would be returning the next day. "What do you mean Adam will be returning tomorrow?" his dad said on the phone. "Yeah, we had to end the competition early since we were concerned for the kids' well-being with incoming bad weather," I told him, brushing off the real concern. "I don't understand," his dad replied. "Adam has been here at home the entire time." The story credit 5YN. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.